Hello and welcome to the Hoop Collective podcast. We talk about the NBA. It's Sunday evening. Joining me from Seattle, Washington is the machine, Kevin Pelton. Hello, Kevin.
What's up, Wendy?
There's a lot going on in the NBA, actually. There's a lot of teams on rapid rises and rapid descents. And we don't have time to talk about it all. We had to kind of joust with a little bit with who we were going to feature. But I think we're contractually obligated to talk about the Lakers, who got rough news with Anthony Davis over the weekend. He has a foot injury. There's been some mixed reporting. I've heard some things. I think it's unclear, and maybe by the time this pod comes out, there'll be more of a statement. The Lakers haven't made an official injury announcement yet. Darvin Ham talked about it on Sunday. My feel is that this is an injury where they're evaluating several different options on what to do, but suffice to say, he's not going to be out a game or two. He's going to be out an extended period, and hopefully it's an injury that he can, get some treatment on and get it healed. It's not good. It's not a sprained ankle. It's not a sprained foot, from what I understand. It's something a little bit more concerning than that. So, the Lakers had really caught some traction here, Pelton. I went to LA this week. I was there. I talked to some of their folks. I watched them play. When I left LA on Friday, I was thinking, within a few days here, the Lakers could be ahead of the Warriors in the standings. And they had sort of found a formula that was keeping them in games. Their three-point shooting had gotten better. They had gotten healthier. Russell Westbrook moving to the bench has been more helpful than when he was in the starting lineup. He still has his moments either way, but he wasn't hurting them as badly, and in some cases was helping them. And Anthony Davis was playing, first team NBA, all NBA level basketball. And even LeBron, who, to put this diplomatically, LeBron's activity level and intensity level defensively tends to come and go based on, I shouldn't say this, it tends to come and go. I speculate that it sometimes depends on his faith in what the team can do. And it looks like LeBron in recent games has been hugely invested. Now, they have a game tonight they're tipping off right about as we're recording this. So I don't know what will happen in this game. But Kevin, what is your initial feeling? Let's say that it's a month without Anthony Davis. What do you think the Lakers are looking at in a guy who was going to be an absolute clear-cut all-star now being sidelined yet again in his career?
Yeah, and maybe even more than that so far this season. You guys talked about the Bontemps straw poll on Friday. I was one of the voters who had Anthony Davis on my ballot. He got my 5th place MVP vote based on how he's performed this season, despite the Lakers' record being what it is. So that's obviously going to be very difficult to replace. I mean, Thomas Bryant gave them some great minutes in the second half of that win on Friday night against the Nuggets, but counting on him to play at that level, over an extended absence is not fair, I think, to Thomas Bryant or to the Lakers.
I agree.
Yes.
Yeah.
And look, I mean, as much as the Lakers had sort of elevated what their upside looked like, the way that they've played lately, and even in that loss to the Celtics that they had in overtime on Tuesday, still, I think, was an impressive performance, all things considered, and, obviously beating the Nuggets. But they didn't have a lot of margin for error in the first place when you're starting out at 12-16. And when you then lose Anthony Davis for a month, and realistically, is that going to be the last major injury the Lakers suffer this season? Probably not. So that's where I think it all kind of starts to stack up against them.
Yeah. I mean, so they started very well known 2-10. And they were 10 and coming into this game tonight, 10-6 since, having played a pretty challenging schedule. This last 8 games, they had a 6-game road trip where Anthony Davis missed 2 games. They went 3-3. Then they split games this week with the Celtics and Nuggets at home, which, was really good to do that, to go 4-4 in that 8-game stretch. I thought it acquitted them well. And actually, as I was looking around, I was kind of thinking, you know what, like maybe it could happen. Um, and and I say maybe it could happen. Maybe they could, make the play in. And heck, under certain circumstances, maybe even crawl into that six, depending on what trade they're able to make. I felt as optimistic about I've been up with the Lakers really in a long time. And I was, and you could feel in Los Angeles, there was a lot of respect for Darvin Ham. I mean, there still is about what he's been able to do with this team. The team is significantly flawed. We've gone over that. He's been ridden pretty hard for maybe sticking with certain lineups for too long, but he just doesn't have he doesn't have a long list of players that he trusts, in my view, based on his actions. I don't think he's got a long list of players that he trusts, and not just a part of the roster.
I mean, I thought that second half against the Celtics was very telling, that they basically stuck with the same guys, and I think it eventually caught up to them in overtime.
Yeah, he played to win a regulation. He went to overtime and it didn't work. But I kind of got myself to the point where I said, okay, like maybe they can happen. And in talking to folks around the Lakers, of course they're very interested in various trade talks. I think there was, a feel that there wasn't a lot of players available at this point, which is not stunning. There's a lot of teams still in the mix, and it's early in the trade season window here. But that there was going to, there was significant interest, and there maybe still is. But the problem that they're now looking at is they have a really tough rest of this month. They're in Washington tonight. Washington has lost 9 straight games. I don't know what will happen. The game really just tipped off. If Washington doesn't win this game, we'll be talking about Washington on Wednesday. But they have this little road trip here. They come home for a game, and then they have another 5-game road trip where they go back out east. They sort of have just their schedule this month is really, really unfriendly. There was a in November, there was this time where they got like 4 or 5 days off in a row. And I actually saw some people grumbling, like, how do the Lakers get to have 4 or 5 days off? Everything goes their way. And, I've heard some people complain that just because of TV and I'm sorry, the game is in Washington. I'm sorry, is in LA tonight. I don't know why I said the game was in Washington. I saw the Wizards people in LA this week. They go on the road tomorrow to the Suns and then the Kings. But sorry, I totally lost my train of thought there. But their schedule, they had to be gone on Thanksgiving, Christmas, and New Year's this year. And they have this trip where they, go through Dallas on Christmas Day. So Pelton, like, now I don't know where they're going to be at the end of this month. And, they're going to take some losses without Anthony Davis. And I go back to wondering, where their motivation is going to be on the trade market. It's very hard for them to convince themselves to take up cap space next year or use those 2 first-round picks that they have. So the 2 type of trades that they sort of have at their disposal, one is to use Westbrook and the picks for a star player. One or both of the picks for a star player, somebody who gets a big salary. And that's the kind of trade they're looking for. But, there's not a lot of stars potentially available. And you have to really weigh whether a player who might be available is worth potentially mortgaging what you've left with what you've got on this roster. Then there's the second trade. This is the trade they've been more trying to do recently, is looking at taking Patrick Beverley and Kendrick Nunn, both of whom are on the last year of their contracts, and flipping them for a player who could help them more immediately, more likely a shooter or somebody with size. And that type of trade, it doesn't necessarily guarantee they'd bring back somebody with money on his contract, but it's probable that they would trade for a guy who would have money left on his contract. And if they did that, that would spoil their option to use all the Westbrook cap space this summer. It would choke that off. So they've got to sit there and choose between closing cap space or giving away the draft picks. And they're only going to do that, I think, if they really believe that this year's team can get something real done. And that's really been where they've been at since October. And I do think they were moving in that direction. They were being convinced that this team could get something done, and they were starting to move in that path. And now I wonder, Pelton, if he is facing a month or longer, whether or not they ever get themselves there and they just take it on the chin this season. It's not a decision that gets made today, but it certainly is going to have them putting the brakes on, I would suspect, trying to look at a significant move right now.
Well, I think it's not a move that gets made today is the important thing there, because as much as we talk about December 15th as the start of trade season, because it's when so many additional players become trade eligible and it becomes a lot easier to make trades, is our colleague Bobby Marks loves to point out, there are very, very rarely actually trades consummated in the month of December. And, certainly not very often, as he pointed out, the last one was the one that his Nets made with Houston involving Terrence Williams many years ago. That was the last one that was actually on December 15th. And part of the reason for that is you just know so much more about where your team is going on January 15th than you do on December 15th, and even more a couple weeks after that when we actually hit the trade deadline. So, I think there was a lot of talk about the possibility that smaller move involving Beverly and or Nunn could be something the Lakers could do more quickly, while leaving the Westbrook option is something possibly down the road. And I think that it affects the chances of that, because to your point, if you're scraping just to make the play-in tournament, then that's not worth throwing away. Certainly either the 2 first-round picks that you can trade. That's been my position from the start. Like, when you're in a hole like this, stop digging is the first thing you do. They do have a lot of second-round picks. I hadn't realized, I just looked this up, but they have Chicago's second-round pick this year, which might be more valuable than it seemed when they got that one.
That's a very fair point. Chicago is going to be our next topic in a little bit. I don't know if we'll be our next one, but yes. The thing is, some of the teams around them are also having difficulty. You're looking, Steph is out, so they're going to take the Warriors are going to take some losses, although they got to win in Toronto, who is one of the teams that is going the wrong direction. Toronto has lost 5 in a row and has slipped to 10th in the Eastern Conference, even though they got healthy. As just a quick aside, they finally got healthy and they've lost 8 out of 10. And now there's folks saying maybe the Raptors should consider getting into the Wembanyama sweepstakes. It's that's the way it's going in Toronto. But if you're the Lakers coming into this weekend, you're saying, well, heck, the Warriors are the team right in front of us. We're only a game and a half back of them, or I think they were they're tied in the loss column right now. So depending on how things go tonight, they could have passed them. And, the Timberwolves are in front of them. The Timberwolves are no great shakes and not playing really well right now. And that's 10th place right there. Like, you could convince yourself that you could, continue to keep your head at 500 and get through this tough portion of the schedule, because the teams are, right in front of you are also dealing with injury problems. And now you've got your own injury problem just as bad. So, it's really a tough hand for the Lakers. And I guess if you were being cynical, you would say, well, if you have Anthony Davis and you put your all your eggs in the Anthony Davis basket, you're going to be disappointed because he's going to get injured. But this was another injury that it didn't seem like a high trauma injury, Pelton, unless there was something else brewing there that we didn't know about. It just looked like he landed oddly on the foot. It's got to be frustrating for them. It's time to knock that new business idea out of the park with Shopify, the all-in-one commerce platform to start, run, and grow your business. Forget the off-season work. Shopify makes it simple to sell to anyone from anywhere. Whether you're selling warm-ups or wall hangers, it's time to start selling with Shopify and join the platform simplifying commerce for millions of businesses worldwide. With Shopify, you'll customize your online store to your brand.
discover new customers, and build the relationships that create those die-hard fans. Shopify fields all the sales channels to grow a winning business, from an in-person POS system to an all-in-one e-commerce platform, even across social media platforms like TikTok, Facebook, and Instagram. And thanks to 24/7 support and free on-demand business courses, Shopify is on your team every step of the way. It's how every minute new sellers around the world score their first sale with Shopify, and you can too. Shopify is the secret to becoming a business champion by making it simple for anyone to sell their products anywhere, taking the guesswork out of selling. When you're ready to take your winning idea to the world, team up with Shopify, the commerce platform powering millions of businesses down the street and around the globe. Try out Shopify for free today and start selling anywhere.
It's the best time of year. Football season's in full swing. Basketball and hockey have returned, and nothing beats seeing your favorite team live. Make up for lost time. Go enjoy a game. Vivid Seats, the official ticketing partner of ESPN, is offering you $10 off your first $100 ticket purchase with the code HOOP. That's code HOOP. Download the app or visit vividseats.com today. Vivid Seats, life happens live. All right. Before we talk about some teams that are playing well, let's talk about the Bulls. The Bulls gave up 100. Pelton, the Bulls shot 52% on the road tonight in Minnesota. Minnesota was coming back from a long road trip that was not great for them. I saw them on the trip. They looked terrible. They looked like zombies. They were having all kinds of difficulty scoring without Karl Towns. Their point guard position has been a little bit of a mess. With D'Angelo Russell has been banged up, although he came back.
He came back all right.
Yeah. And so you shoot 52% on the road in a team's first game back from the road trip, and Gobert was out tonight. Okay. So you're saying, okay, we're going to take advantage of Gobert being out, and we're going to shoot 52%. Like, if I had told you that, and then I said, by the way, you're going to put up not only you shoot 52%, it's going to be like a real 52%. You're going to score 126 points. You're like, well, we're breaking our losing streak. The Bulls gave up 150. Oh, by the way, Naz Reid, who was their starter at center, he got hurt like in the second quarter of this game and didn't come back. So the Timberwolves shot 66% in this game. They were at 70% through three quarters. Ant Edwards had a killer. I think he had 20 in the third quarter in this game at 37. Russell had one of the best games, if not the best game of the season. He was plus 33. And the Bulls get absolutely blasted. They are on a start of a 4-game road trip after getting swept in a homestand, a 2-game homestand against the Knicks a couple days before that. And I have to tell you that the Chicago Bulls are now 11-18. And let me see, are they in 10th place, or have they fallen out of the whole play-in line? If they're not,
they are 11th.
Okay, they've fallen to 11th. They've lost 4 in a row, 7 of 10. And Billy Donovan gave an update that Lonzo Ball is still not able to run without pain. And I mean, at this point, I don't know. I know there's no timetable, but I can't see how you can realistically expect him to come back this season. Pelton, what should the Bulls be thinking about right now? Like, if you were brought in to consult their front office, what would your advice to them be about how to go forward at this point?
My advice would be to not worry about the fact that your pick for that they sent to Orlando to complete the Nikola Vucevic trade is top 4 protected this year, because you got to try to get value for the players you have on your roster. Well, you can. I mean, Vucevic, who knows what his value is at this point, but DeMar DeRozan suddenly, is a year away from his extension eligible in the off season. You have to start thinking, I think, about his future already. I was kind of prepared to come on this podcast and talk about how, Chicago had been to a degree unlucky, making up for the luck that they had last season. Their point differential before today, it wasn't actually all that different from last season when they were outscored on the season, but they were 25-16 in clutch games last year, which was the 4th best record in the league. This year, they're 3-11, which is the worst record in the league. So it's completely flipped on them. But you give up the most.
It's because
points.
they're not as good defensively. I mean, they were good defensively last year. They could get stops.
Yeah, you give up the most points since 1982 that the Bulls have allowed the most points in Timberwolves franchises, is our producer Jackson notes in the chat. It becomes a lot more difficult, I think, to make that argument that, you're right there and you've just been somewhat unlucky. And it's kind of the same situation as with the Lakers, who are also in 11th in the West, is you have no margin for error. I mean, yes, they're only a game and a half out of the play-in at this point, but that's how serious are you of a contender if you're going through the play-in? I think is a fair question, especially in a conference where you're talking about playing either Milwaukee or Boston, most likely, maybe Cleveland in the first round. In the West, I think you can talk yourself into, hey, we could go through the play-in and then potentially pull an upset, especially if we're a team with championship experience. That's a lot harder case to make for Chicago. I think the upside for them at this point is to get summarily dispatched in the first round like they were last season. Like that's the best case scenario for them.
Okay, yeah, let's do some reverse math, because the one math you can say is that they're a game and a half back of the Toronto Raptors, who are in free fall, and you could say, well, we can catch the Raptors. But let's do reverse math. Okay, as you said, they owe their pick to Orlando Magic if it falls outside the top 4. It is top 4 protected. Right now, as we sit here, the Bulls have the NBA's 7th worst record. That means to keep, if the lottery was today, if the season froze today and ended today, the Bulls would have a 30% chance of moving from 7th into the top 4 to keep their pick. So 70% chance Orlando gets it. That's with the team that they have right now. If they are able to get down to 5th, now, I'm not even going to rule out 4th. 4th is if they could somehow get to the 4th worst record, that would be big, because the top 4, they all have a 50% chance of getting into the top 4, of staying in the top 4. If you're either the number 1 or number 2 worst records, you have a 52% chance of staying in the top 4. If you're 3rd, you have a 50.3% chance of staying in the top 4. If you're 4th, you have a 50% chance of staying in the top 4. I don't know if the Bulls can get down below any of those teams. Because right now we're talking about Charlotte, Detroit, San Antonio, and Houston. I don't think San Antonio and Houston are making moves to get better. Charlotte, in theory, should improve now that LaMelo Ball is back and Gordon Hayward are back. So maybe you could get in there. But if I were Charlotte, I would be looking to sell off myself. And Detroit has been a little bit better recently, but only a little bit. But even if you could get to 5th worst, you'd have a 42% chance of keeping your pick. And that now has to become a number you got to seriously consider, because not only, yes, to lose that pick is gutting, but I'd rather go for it and have a 40 or 42 or 50% chance of keeping it than ending up in no man's land, not giving yourself assets, and having a 30% chance, because that's where they're at right now. 32%. And I hate to be the guy in December to talk about the percentages on the lottery, but this is what their front office has got to be discussing. They've got to have talking about this. I know they just signed Zach LaVine to a 5-year contract, but I think they got to consider it. I think they got to see what that market would be. There'd be some worries about his knee. I think they got to see what I know for sure there'd be a market for DeRozan. Vucevic would be a rental, but there could be a market there. There would definitely be a market for Alex Caruso. Don't you think, Pelton? There would,
Oh yeah.
You'd probably be able to get a first-round pick for Alex Caruso, is my guess. You're not getting an unprotected, 2023 first-round pick for Caruso, but you could get a pick for Caruso. And it's more than what you said. It's not that you want to quote unquote give up, but what is your upside? In the last 12 months, this has not been a good team. And the guys that they have on the roster, they were really banking on, like Patrick Williams, they haven't been able to be difference makers. And it's still strange to me that they really didn't go get a real frontline point guard option with Lonzo not progressing from that injury over the summer. They signed Goran Dragic, who's been a decent signing as a backup level player, but that they really didn't do that I can't explain that, but that's in the past. That doesn't really, you want to do forensic analysis of the past, that's fine. I don't know at this point. That's not gonna inform what you got to do going forward. And so I think it's something they seriously got to consider, Pelton, like you said. And I knew that we'd be going to the lottery board a lot during this season. Wembanyama just had a weekend in Paris. They played in Paris over the weekend, and there was a bunch of NBA scouts there, from what I understand. There was a number of NBA scouts there, and Scoot Henderson, by the way. Just the Bulls keeping their pick, even if it's fourth, would be a huge thing at this point. So that's a brutal reality. But I look at these teams in front of them, and I don't know. I don't see the rapid improvement. One of the things that's happened. The Knicks, by the way, won in Indiana on Sunday. Indiana had a miserable weekend, Pelton. Your former employer. Do people know that you used to work for the Pacers?
It's been a very long time. It's not a secret now.
Oh, you're not taking ownership in this weekend's performance?
Well, I might take ownership on Tyrese Halliburton if I could, but
okay. All right. Yeah, we've covered that. Anyway, the Pacers blew games in Cleveland and at home to the Knicks. The Knicks, by the way, have won 7 in a row. They've won 8 out of 10. They are now in 6th place. They are within the play-in line. And I'd say something else about the Knicks before we go on about the Bulls. Pelton, the Knicks are 10-6 on the road. I talk about the Doug Moe standings, which is valuable this time of year. Road wins subtract home losses. The Knicks are +3, which is, the Bucks are +4. The Celtics, who had a bad weekend, are +7. The Cavs are +4. The Nets are +4. The Bulls or the Knicks are right there. They have played more road games than home games and have been better on the road. And we've talked recently about their changes in the personnel to defensively. They have now swung to a positive differential. They're all the indicators are green, Pelton. I don't know, what your outlook is on the Knicks real quick, but that's a team that we didn't necessarily see in 6th place in mid-December. But as long as we're going to talk about the Bulls being bad, I might as well point out that the Knicks are doing really well.
Well, part of that, of course, is because they played each other twice in Chicago last week.
It did help.
Both those games. Yeah. No, the one indicator with the Knicks, and this is the first thing I always look for in a situation like this, is opponent 3-point shooting. And lo and behold, during the 7-game winning streak, opponents are shooting 28% from three, which is the lowest in the league in that span. Somewhat unsurprisingly. I mean, we had that big debate during Tibbs' first year in New York when their opponent 3-point percentage was so low. Like, oh, Knicks fans were pushing back against the idea that was unsustainable. And they were in, the 3-point difference, opposed 3-point percentage didn't regress all the way to the mean that season. It did last season when their defense wasn't very good. But
Yeah.
when opponents don't make threes against the Knicks, they're in real trouble, I guess, is the moral of the story here.
Yes. Well, by the way, New York is the hub of great basketball in the NBA right now because the Nets won their 6th in a row when they won 10 of 11, and Durant had 43 and Kyrie 38. We talked about the Nets last week. We just don't have the bandwidth, but I just want to recognize I see them. We're aware.
And opponents are hitting 38% of their threes against them. So that is not fueled by opponent shooting at all.
Yeah, they have had a friendly section of schedule, but they're crushing that section of schedule. So, and this is the concept of Durant and Kyrie doing a 1-2 body blow is what people have been waiting for 4 years. So that's been happening. They're devastating guys. But anyway, back to the Bulls. This road trip, it's going to get worse before it gets better. And a loss like this, where you give up 150 points, and it's going to be something that's going to be discussed more and more. I think you're gonna see some Bulls stuff coming here, and they could wait a little bit longer, but they also could take advantage of the fact that there are no sellers right now. And if they were to sell, that they may be able to do well in the market. And I think we may be seeing that discussed a lot more coming up.
I think on the Bulls, the other thing that would probably come up if I were in their front office is, okay, let's say that ownership doesn't have the appetite for tearing things down and trading Zach LaVine or DeMar DeRozan at this point. The team I would be talking about and the model I would be talking about in Chicago is the Portland model of let's take a brief step back and kind of reshuffle the pieces so that they fit better around our stars, because that's what the Blazers did last season. They did not get, I think they finished 7th going into the lottery, 6th or 7th. They picked, I believe, 7th, where they got Shadon Sharpe, who's a very exciting prospect. But the moves that were so widely panned at the time in terms of trading CJ McCollum, Norman Powell, Robert Covington, lo and behold, they were able to flip those pieces into, Josh Hart came specifically from that Pelicans trade, just as Winslow has been great for them off the bench as a fill-in starter, and then getting Jeremy Grant, who's playing at a high level this season. And lo and behold, after that one season in the lottery, they're back right now 17-13 against what's been a very difficult schedule, and feeling good, I think, about their chances of being in the top 6 again in the West.
Yes, it's a very good point, and it's a good ideal. However, the difference was that the
Blazers pick was lottery protected.
Yes, they knew that they were going to retain their pick. Like they were incentivized to get down there to get a player. And they also had decided that, that they were going forward with Anthony Simons over CJ McCollum. That decision had been made, and from their new management that took over midway through last year. And so, it was a little bit different. The dynamic on the Orlando situation is fascinating. And speaking of Orlando, again, another team, we got all these risers and fallers here. Orlando swept a weekend series in Boston. Let's say that again. Swept a weekend series in Boston. Jason Tatum did not play on Sunday for personal reasons. But nonetheless, the Magic won their 6th consecutive game. And they have sort of come roaring to life here. They're still kind of in the basement, but they're now tied in the loss, and they're tied in the win column with the Bulls. They've got a couple more losses, so they're technically in 13th, and the Bulls are in 11th. But they have the same number of wins. Paolo Banchero scored over 30 on Sunday. He scored over 20 in 7 straight games since he's come back from injury. He's just looked great. I mean, he has been. It's kind of crazy now, and Jalen Smith has had some. I'm sorry, Jabari Smith has had some issues with the Rockets, and they use them totally differently. But like, honestly, I did a piece on this. I talked to the people in Orlando. They were undecided to a certain extent up until the final 48 hours on Banchero versus Jabari. And, I think they feel good about their pick. And Franz Wagner, who we've been talking about since summer, since he looked great for Germany in the Euro Championships, is having an explosive second season. And Mo Wagner, his brother, actually had a huge performance. He doesn't always do that. Yeah, he had a huge performance Friday against the Celtics in that first win when Tatum did play. Boston's a little out of sorts. Their turnover issues have come back and bit them. They were pretty much untouchable offensively, historic offensive numbers. Now they've failed to crack 100 twice in the last week. And the turnovers bit them in this game. But, Jamal Mosley, the Magic's coach, was talking after this game about how it's not sort of one thing, although Banchero's been a great, offensive leader, but they're getting contributions up and down their lineup. By the way, Robert Williams came back this weekend for the Celtics. This was supposed to be the moment where the Celtics were supposed to really turn it on. Now, granted, he's coming off a knee surgery. He's been out for months. I'm not expecting him to walk onto the court and all of a sudden be defensive player of the year level, but it's still pretty impressive for the Magic to do that. I'm not sure, Pelton, what we can take away from this, or even if it's advised that the Magic keep winning like this with some pressure from in front of them, the Bulls and Wizards coming flying back at them, and the Raptors too. They've made up 5 games on the team in front of them, the Wizards, in the last 10. I'm not so sure that's what you necessarily want from them, but this is a team that's been just dwelling in the dregs for seasons now. It's the best run they've had in a long time. I guess we should acknowledge it.
Yeah, I mean, specifically offensively, because even when this team was good, they couldn't score. It was primarily they were doing it defensively back in the Steve Clifford era.
They had no offensive talent. They haven't had talent on this offensive talent on this roster in forever.
Yeah, so I'm sure it's very exciting for Magic fans. And Markelle Fultz and Cole Anthony. It was fun as it was, I guess, early in the season to see Paolo Banchero and Franz Wagner handling the ball a lot and even kind of playing point guard at times in some of their second unit lineups. Getting Markelle Fultz and Cole Anthony back, having legitimate healthy point guards, and having a consistent rotation for Jamal Mosley for this 6-game stretch here where he's basically had a 10-player rotation and Caleb Houston played in 1 game and that's it. Like, it hasn't been guys shuffling in and out of the lineup like it has been the rest of the season. I'm sure that's all been very helpful for them. Now, I will say again, I just mentioned this with the Knicks, 28% opponent 3-point shooting in their winning streak. Magic's winning streak, 29% opponent 3-point shooting. So it is this incredibly powerful force that is probably going to prevent them from moving up too high in the standings. But there are some Magic teams of recent vintage that could get that kind of opponent shooting and not take advantage of it.
Yeah. Again, for sure. Banchero is the type of talent that definitely can help turn a franchise. It can be a pivotal moment. I did not anticipate that he would be the type of player who could dramatically affect winning. This is one of the things that I've sometimes talked about, is it's extraordinarily rare to have a rookie that genuinely changes a few games, yes, but like genuinely changes a whole team's win-loss record. Like, even Luka, it wasn't like he got there. He was a sort of star ready that we've seen in recent times, the last decade or so, who's come in and like been ready to immediately make a difference. And even Luka really wasn't able to completely flop the Mavericks around. Banchero is positively affecting winning. Ja too. Ja hit the ground running, and it even took him a little while. So, I mean, they were better. Don't get me wrong, but Banchero, I mean, far and away the leader for Rookie of the Year at this point, in my opinion. I know that when he was out for a while, there was momentum for Ben Matherin, and we've talked about Matherin on the pod. Matherin has done a lot of good stuff, struggling a little bit recently, but Banchero is doing some just tremendous work there, and definite reason to be excited about him for sure, no matter what happens the rest of this year.
You mentioned the comp with Jabari Smith Jr., and I think it is really fascinating to go back and look at that a little bit, because one of the things that was true last year and I watched a ton of those guys, especially Jabari, because Walker Kessler was also such a fascinating prospect to me. Jabari was the more efficient of these two scorers in college, and I think Paolo probably had a somewhat higher usage rate at Duke than they were pretty close to identical in terms of usage rate. So part of it, I think, was the Duke ecosystem was not as well set up for Paolo to succeed as the Auburn ecosystem was with Jabari, because in part because of the fact that he didn't need the floor spacing to open things up for him the same way that Paolo did. But then you kind of put them in an NBA context, and the contested shot making that was so valuable for Jabari Smith Jr. in college has not translated over, whereas Paolo's physical gifts and his kind of savvy with the ball in his hands has translated in kind of a better ecosystem. Even Orlando turns out. So he's been more efficient, or basically the same efficiency as an NBA rookie as he was as a college freshman.
Unheard of. And I've been talking since his first couple weeks, his ability to get to the foul line. We are in an era right now where the officials are calling things more favorably for offensive players than just what we've ever seen. It's one of the reasons why, not to get into monetary policy, but one of the reasons why the Federal Reserve is increasing interest rates is because they're trying to cool down inflation. One of the reasons why the officials are it's a directive from the league office, but one of the reasons why they're really trying to crack down on travels and carries is because there's been some crazy scoring inflation here. But even with that, you just don't see rookies come in and have that kind of efficiency. From talking to folks in Orlando, their assessment at the end of the day was they felt that Paolo was going to come in and definitely be a more impactful player, especially for them, because they knew that they needed playmakers on their team, and that they were going to come in and he was going to go be a point forward out of the gates. And they thought he would, be more helpful, but the risk that they thought Jabari had great upside, maybe even more upside than Paolo, that, they felt pretty good that Paolo would be the better player in year one, but, they weren't as convinced on where they would be in year 4, year 7. And that was one of the things that they were debating internally, going back and forth. Do we take the guy who can be better now, or do we take the guy who we think might have a chance to be better down the road? We'll see. Jabari obviously has that runway, but the Paolo pick is already paying dividends. And I don't know, maybe if you're a Bulls fan, you start to root for the Magic to win a lot more games here in the offing.
And also to tie it together, the Blazers, they still have their first round pick that the Blazers kept last year from the Larry Nance Jr., Lauri Markkanen 3-team trade.
Who has it?
Chicago still has it. As far as what they're rooting for.
But what's
still lottery protected? So if Portland makes it, Chicago would get that first round pick.
Right. That's right. That's like the one, the positive asset, because they're still, aren't they out another pick despite
San Antonio from the DeRozan sign and trade.
Right. That's right. So by the way, I should put, I'm keeping an eye, Pelton, we're on Nikola Jokic tonight, who's closing in on a possible 30-30 game. He has a triple double, but I don't know, by tomorrow it won't matter, but I mean, it will matter, but won't know, but I'm just keeping an eye on that. We mentioned a little bit ago about the Grizzlies. Grizzlies are one of the teams that are playing well. Now, they had a rough loss on Saturday to the Thunder where John Morant was ejected from the game for telling a fan that the refs were screwing him, basically. And that was the second technical when he got thrown out. They were already way down. It was just an odd thing to see. And I don't know, we may hear about that we may hear about whether that technical gets rescinded early in the week. But the Grizzlies, despite not having Des Bane, have vaulted to number 1 in the Western Conference. The Pelicans took a few losses on their road trip. Big win on Saturday for the Suns without DeAndre Ayton and Cam Johnson and Cam Payne, with Devin Booker coming back from the hamstring injury and dropping 58 to get the Pelicans after they lost a couple of games to them the previous week in New Orleans. But anyway, the Grizzlies have gone to number 1. Jaren Jackson Jr. coming back from his offseason injury. He's played, I think, 13 or 14 games, has blocked. He's averaging 3.5 blocks a game, blocked almost everything in sight, shooting the ball really, really well. They're getting good production from their bench that's just gotten healthier, and just chugging along. Won 8 out of their last 10 to go to first place. Danny Green was on NBA Today with me and Malika and everybody on Friday. He was in studio. He was in LA, and he's rehabbing from his ACL tear that he had last year with the Sixers, hoping to get back by the end of the regular season. But he was saying something that I heard him say on the show, and I kind of scratched my head, but I wasn't sure that's already made some waves. That he said that Des Bane was hoping to get back by Christmas. I don't know if that was an authorized release of information or if that's Dez's hope, but he's obviously hoping to get back soon from a toe injury. But toe injuries are they scare me. Those are things that linger. But obviously Bane was having an all-star season before he went out. The Grizzlies continue to develop their players and have good things happen. They have a real good system. They're having a lot of fun. They were the 2 seed last year, Pelton. So it's not like this is a huge statement for them to be number 1. But with their injuries, you've got to be impressed with the way they've been able to, put together their first third of the season.
What I think kind of fascinates me about the Grizzlies is that in a certain way, their strengths have flipped from last season. Because last season, most notably, if you look at their record when Ja was out of the lineup, it really was a lot about their depth. So, you looked at their best net ratings. A lot of the guys who were up at the top there were reserves for them, particularly Brandon Clark and Tyus Jones playing behind Morant were 2 of the guys at the top of the list. This year, that's basically reversed itself, where it's the starters who have, the highest net ratings, even though we haven't seen that full starting 5 intact because Desmond Bane's injury came before Jaren Jackson Jr. came back from the injury that sidelined him at the start of the season. So even with only 4 of those 5 guys at any given time, they've still been great with that group. And it's the bench without DeAnthony Melton and Kyle Anderson in the mix that has been a little bit less effective. But they also haven't had Zaire Williams a lot. He just came back, I think, last week after missing the start of the season. So they've been relying a lot on David Roddy as a rookie. Jake LaRavia has been in the rotation at times as a rookie. Those 2 guys have particularly poor net ratings for them. And, I think what kind of is fascinating as you think about the Grizzlies heading towards the trade deadline and is that if they could ever get all 9 of these guys healthy at the same time, you could have a pretty solid rotation that doesn't include either of the rookies or Santi Aldama, who began the season as their starting power forward in place of Jackson. And then you'd have, obviously Morant, Bane, Brooks, Jackson, Adams as your starting 5, and then Tyus Jones, John Conchar, who is maybe the star of those development stories this year. Like, John Conchar is a really good NBA player. The Grizzlies quietly signed him to,
Yeah, they signed to a great contract. He's shooting 40% from 3. Like, that's I mean,
And that,
you're
that was like maybe his weakness in college.
yeah, I mean, you're educating me on the net ratings of their bench, but I'm thinking of their bench that they come off with Brandon Clark,
Right.
who is a a good energy player off the bench. Tyus Jones, who's arguably the best backup point guard in the NBA, certainly a huge asset to have on your roster. And they have Aldama, who now he lost his starting job now that Jaren Jackson came back, but he's a guy who was averaging 10 and 6, and also a pretty efficient shooter. So, like, they run very nicely deep. And as you mentioned, Zaire Williams, who was a starter for them last year, also back as well and starting to get going now.
So let's talk about the Danny Green piece of it, because I think it is interesting. Like, if he matched Joe Ingles is scheduled to return on Monday night, which will be 323 days after he suffered his ACL tear on January 30th earlier this year. Assuming that goes as planned, that will be by like a day or two, the fastest any player has come back from a full ACL tear since 2014. So it's generally been at least 11 months. Ingles is going to come back. I think, it's like a week shy of 11 months. So if you had that same timeline, like the most optimistic is what I'm saying for Danny Green would be March 30th. So it's possible in the regular season. Like that's something we could see by the end of the regular season. He does, I feel like, tilt a little more towards the perimeter than I would necessarily want when the Grizzlies are healthy. Like that's something that might be, is that a spot where they look to trade him, to someone else who can kind of wait on that rehab, would like him for the playoffs, and end up with somebody who's kind of more, to me, it's a power forward. Because if Jackson's going to play a lot at center in the playoffs, I would probably want another 4.
Right. You also have to consider who they may play, who they may have to deal with to get out of the West, and they may not really have the greatest feel for that yet. I mean, you can take some guesses. There might be better guesses come February. Now, we had an interesting little moment on set, on air, where I was talking about the Grizzlies trade options, sitting next to Danny, and brought up the concept that Danny could be traded. Which
I assume he wasn't as enthusiastic as Miles Turner was when asked about going to the Lakers.
It was not the same. No, but here's the thing. First off, I've known Danny since he was a rookie. Secondly, Danny is a total and complete pro. Who's been traded 3-4 times in his career.
Yeah, I think he's somebody who understands the business side of it by this point.
To be clear, I mean, he told me, I don't think he'll mind me saying this. I mean, he wants to stay in Memphis. He wants to be there. As I would say too, even if I didn't, I have no reason to believe he doesn't want to be there, but it's not like he's gone Andre Iguodala and just never showed up. He's been there, invested, rehabbing there along with the team, been with the bench. They also have his bird rights, so it's a good idea to say that. And the one thing that I do think this team needs is they do need some calming veteran presence. They have a lot of fun, and that's great, but they also, get a little bit loose sometimes. We saw that in the playoffs last year. So a player like Danny would be interesting. Now, the reason Danny has, he's an expiring contract who you can attach a first round pick to and do a lot of things. And the Grizzlies have an extra first round pick that they got when they got him and a first round pick for DeAnthony Melton in the offseason. They could essentially use that trade where they hasn't really been, the idea was they could still flip that for later. The thing about it is, Pelton, the Grizzlies like to draft. You look at this roster and you think about Zach Kleiman and Rich Cho and those guys, Glenn Grunwald, the guys in that front office. Like, you look at who they play. This team is all guys they've drafted. There's been a couple of, they signed Tyus Jones in a really good free agent signing. They traded for Steven Adams, but like the rest of these guys are guys they drafted. They drafted Des Bane. They drafted John Morant. They drafted Jaren Jackson. They drafted Brandon Clark. They drafted Roddy and LaRavia and Zaire Williams. They like to draft and develop. That's what they're doing. And last year they had cap space to use, and they didn't really use it. They sort of kept their team in place, and and did it with that. So, they definitely have the option to, one of the things that we're already seeing in this trade market is that there's just not a lot of picks going to be available. Um, and that's going to be I think we're going to be talking about a lot. Here's Memphis, a team at the top who has the option to do that. Phoenix is another team that has access to their picks. But we'll see if they actually do it. By the way, Jokic finished. It was a narrow win over the Hornets. Jokic finished with 40 points, 27 rebounds, 10 assists.
Did you see the stat that Ban McMahon tweeted out?
No, I don't follow McMahon.
Of course you don't. The first 35, 25, 10 triple-double since Wilt Chamberlain had 53, 32 rebounds, and 14 assists in 1968.
Whenever you accomplish something and it's something that hasn't been done since Wilt, it's almost like it's a different category. Like it shouldn't even. It should.
So if McMahon tries to bring that for trivia on Friday, you better get that right.
Yeah, I'm obviously not good in the type of trivia that Bontemps comes up with. So the Grizzlies are a team that not only is performing well, but as I say, they're upwardly mobile because they're going to get Bane back. And if Bane gets healthy, like very soon here, they will have their full roster for essentially the first time all season, which I know there's a lot of teams that have injuries. It's not just them, but they've had the injuries and are in first. And they're also upwardly mobile because, I don't know what to do about Danny. I don't really count him on there, but he didn't just tear, he mentioned this to me. I didn't know. He didn't just tear the ACL. He also tore the LCL, which obviously has a shorter thing, but he had to have multiple ligaments repaired. So
yeah, it tends to it definitely complicates it when you have other ligaments involved.
Yeah. So, but he's in good spirits, and he's saying, he's planning on being back, and that he stayed in touch with Joe Ingles, and they've kind of been rooting each other on. So, two guys in their 30s who are coming back from the ACLs. So, but Grizzlies definitely, and when you look at, the Mo standings, the Grizzlies are +4, but have a losing record away. So they get back to full strength. Would not be surprised to see them be more formidable defensively because they're going to be better defensively now that they have Jaren Jackson back. He's, combining him with Steven Adams, they have good interior bulk and rebounding, and then Jaren, who can freelance and try to block everything in sight, which he often does. Maybe even sometimes too much. But obviously the Grizzlies are a force to be reckoned with. And you look at some of the other teams up there. Not everybody's trending great in the Western Conference right now. The Pelicans have lost 3 in a row. Their schedule got tough, and Brandon Ingram's been out with a toe injury. The Nuggets sort of go back and forth. Tough loss to Lakers. They come back and win tonight. The Suns have lost 6 of their last 10 as they deal with injuries. The Kings are coming off a road trip where they, were able to barely keep their head above water. So there's not a lot of teams out there. We just mentioned the issues with the Warriors and the Lakers. There's not a lot of teams in the West that are trending great. The Clippers, now that Kawhi has had a couple of good games in the last week, but how can you get excited about them? They win 3 in a row, and then Paul George and Ivica Zubac are immediately hurt, and Ty Lue is sort of throwing his arms up. So, the East, there's a lot of action. The West is kind of a bit of a wasteland right now, and the Grizzlies are the team that's trending the best out there. I think, Pelton. I don't know if you agree, but.
Yeah, I think that's probably the case. Certainly I'm excited about the Pelicans, another team that I don't know if you mentioned them, another team that has tons of draft picks. Right. That they could potentially trade to upgrade this roster before the deadline. But I feel
the
like
thing about the Pelicans, they're only about 3.3 million under the luxury tax. They've never paid the tax ever. Doesn't mean that they won't, but when you start thinking about what the Pelicans could do with the trade, if it's taking on money that gets them towards the tax, I'm not sure that they're in position to do that just yet.
Yeah, they've got some tradable salaries that would probably be heading out in a deal like that. Jackson Hayes, who's been out of the rotation, certainly I would assume, love to move Devontae Graham since he's got guaranteed money beyond this year, and then Garrett Temple is in effectively an expiring contract because he's non-guaranteed for next year. But I think to your larger point, like the theme of this podcast seems to be the NBA standings are like Chicago weather. If you don't like them, wait a week.
The Bulls are hoping that it changes because right now we're in the winter hasn't even technically started yet, and it's looking cold.
Well, it was 22 degrees. I thought they were showing during the Bears game today, so that seems plenty winterish to me.
Let me tell you, sir, it gets a lot worse. 22 degrees a lot of days in the winter in Chicago is acceptable temperature.
Yeah, I was there during All-Star weekend. It was cold enough for me.
That is the dead of winter, and the coldest temperature I've ever been in was in Chicago. I think it was minus 18 or something before wind chill. I remember there was a game in Craig Sager, may he rest in peace, went out in the loading dock and took a cup of water and threw it in the air, and it froze before it hit the ground and smashed on the ground. Granted, he cooled it to like just above freezing. The water was like probably at 35 degrees already before he threw it in the air. But I remember that and saying, "Oh boy, I'm looking forward to." I saw it on TV and press rail. I'm like, "Oh boy, I'm looking forward to that walk to the car after the game." So, all right. Well, thanks for listening to the Collective Podcast. Thank you, Mr. Pelton. You always make me and all of our listeners smarter. We will be talking to you. Enjoy your holidays if I don't talk to you, and we will be talking to everybody else later this week.
All right, good stuff.